Hi everyone, it's Serena Fazan. Thank you so much for joining us on this Facebook Live. I'm here with John Trevena, a very prominent attorney in Pinellas County in Tampa Bay, Florida, if you're joining us from somewhere else in the country. And right now, the case that everybody is talking about is Michael Drejka. It is a stand your ground case. Michael Drejka is a white man accused of killing a black man over a dispute over a handicapped parking space. And tomorrow begins jury selection. I also want to point out tomorrow begins jury selection 1 year and 1 month to the day that Marquise McLaughlin died. John is willing to open up to me. It's his first exclusive interview going in depth about this case. I want to point out that I reached out to all the other parties and no one else could participate. It is customary for the prosecutor's office not to comment about the case. The defense attorneys chose not to comment on this case. I'm sure they will at a later point. And Michael Drejka, in fact, was going to be here, but he decided not to.
Correct.
Let's talk about that first, John. First of all, I mean, the case in itself. How are you feeling? How are you feeling right now, a day before jury selection?
Well, we know the facts and the truth are on our side, so we're very confident in the ultimate outcome. We're frustrated by a lot of misinformation that keeps getting put out to the public. For example, it's commonly referred to as the handicap parking space shooting or the convenience store parking lot shooting. But in reality, this really had nothing to do with the handicap space in the sense of the use of lethal force. When the alleged victim, Mr. McLaughlin, left the convenience store, he made a beeline straight to my client and attacked him. At no point did he inquire as to what the dispute was even about. So the alleged victim had no idea that it was about a handicapped parking space. So the whole idea that this all started over an argument about a parking space is completely erroneous. It started over a dispute between my client and Mr. McLaughlin's girlfriend regarding her parking in a handicapped space. But when the alleged victim attacked my client, he had no idea what it was about. All he knew is that some citizen had told him, poked his head in the store and said, "Hey, it sounds like your lady, your girlfriend out here is getting into it with someone." No details, nothing about the parking space. And then he immediately left his son in the store alone and made a beeline straight for my client and shoved him to the ground.
But you are not arguing, though, that Michael Drejka did go up to Marquise McLaughlin's other half and did talk to her about parking in a handicapped space.
No, that's what happened. He did indeed complain to her that she was parked in a handicapped parking space and was taking video and pictures of her vehicle. No question about it.
You know, John, in a case like this, and I don't mean to shift gears all over the place, but jury selection is key in a case like this. I mean, we saw it in Casey Anthony. We saw it in George Zimmerman. Both those cases, I think a lot of people were shocked at the verdict on those cases. And if you talk to anybody, they're always talking about the jury selection and how vital jury selection is in this case. 6 jurors will be selected tomorrow. Well, I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow, quite frankly. I think it's going to take some time. But hundreds of people, right, will be interviewed?
Oh, yes. I suspect we'll probably go through a pool of several hundred before we end up with a panel. And it's unknown how long that process is going to take, given the unprecedented pretrial publicity, in this case locally. I don't think we've had a case of this magnitude in many decades. And no one is really familiar with how long that process is going to take, given the extent of that publicity.
Well, give the audience and give the viewers and I don't even know if you can you give us some of the questions you might be asking these potential jurors?
Well, I don't want to go into specifics. I will say that we believe that the demographics of Pinellas County favor our client. And that's why we didn't move for a change of venue, is that our analysis of the politics and the makeup of the potential jury pool should bode favorably for Mr. Drejka. This is a case that's a little bit opposite of what you would normally choose for a juror. Typically, defense lawyers look for free thinkers, teachers, engineers, people who have liberal bend to them. This case is different. We're going to be seeking individuals who are more conservative politically, who are rule of law types, and will better be able to put themselves in the place of Mr. Drejka at the time this occurred.
Well, let me ask you this at this point, and again, I don't know if you can answer this question as well. I think it's important for the viewers to know that we didn't do any type of rehearsal or anything like that. You don't, as a journalist, when you sit down and you interview somebody. Of course, hopefully the journalist researched the case, but so these questions, it's the first time they're coming at you.
Very first.
So in a case like this, in such a high-profile case, do both sides hire a jury expert? In my past experience in covering high-profile cases, that has occurred.
We have a jury consulting firm that will be working with us. We're not going to disclose specifics about that other than to state that we do indeed have a jury consulting firm that will be deep diving the potential jurors' backgrounds to give us a better, more comprehensive picture than what will come out just during questioning in voir dire. The state, I doubt they have a jury expert. They may. They haven't indicated. It's not something that we have to disclose in advance. So I really don't know if they're going to use a jury expert, but we most definitely are.
If you're just joining us on this Facebook Live, we are talking about the Michael Drejka case. It's a stand your ground case that has been the center of a national debate, not only because of the stand your ground right in the state of Florida, but also because of the racial tensions in this case. John, are you worried about that?
I'm worried about it from a security perspective. We have received death threats on the defense team simply for representing Mr. Drejka and for no other reason. We've turned over that information to the sheriff's office for investigation. I don't know if they made any arrests from the people who purportedly made these threats, but it's concerning. It's not a race case. That's the irony. The judge himself, in his written order in one of the motion hearings, specifically stated that there's no evidence that there was any racial motivation in this case whatsoever.
But so many people do believe that this is involved race, surrounds race. In fact, I just watched a documentary before I came over here that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson produced, and he was talking about, stand your ground and about how many African American victims there are, and it's at a higher percentage. We even see movies right now based on that.
It's most definitely an agenda of certain individuals to try to make this a race case. Again, I will say that there's absolutely zero evidence that there was any race involvement in it whatsoever. It's kind of absurd, really, when you look at the true facts of the case. It had nothing to do with the race of the individuals involved. My client's pet peeve was about handicapped parking spaces. So yes, he did talk to Mr. McLaughlin's girlfriend about her parking illegally in a handicapped space. She shouldn't have been there. And he
Is he handicapped?
He himself actually does have a handicap issue with his hand, but he doesn't have a placard to park in the disabled. But his ex-wife did before she died, and his ex-wife was catastrophically injured, near amputation of her foot. So he has a very personal relationship with, if you will, handicapped parking and handicapped spaces, and it's his pet peeve if somebody parks in a space that isn't handicapped. And he exercises his First Amendment right to tell that person, you shouldn't be parked here. Are you handicapped? Do you have the proper permit to park here? And if they don't, he'll ask them to move their vehicle and explain to them how difficult that makes it for the truly handicapped when you take up their parking spaces. So he has this conversation with individuals. He's had it in the past. He's never had an issue like this where he was violently physically attacked because he asked someone why are they parked in a handicapped space. And again, it's important to remember that the alleged victim, Mr. McLaughlin, he had no knowledge about what the argument was between his girlfriend and Mr. Drejka. All he knew is there was some dispute going on in the parking lot, an unknown reason, and he went out there, and before making any inquiry about why, what happened, what's going on here, he never even said any of those things. He just immediately ran up and shoved my client to the ground very violently.
On the other side of the coin, a lot of people say Marquise McLaughlin, a father of three, was protecting his family.
I think that's ridiculous. You don't protect your family by committing criminal acts against an innocent person. Mr. Drejka was within his legal rights to complain about her parking in the space. Everyone has a First Amendment right to talk to someone like that. So there was no illegal acts on the part of Mr. Drejka. He was the real victim in this case, and that's what everyone seems to be missing. Mr. Drejka was the one who was subjected to a violent physical attack. Let's look at the facts. He didn't hurt anyone. He didn't touch anyone. He didn't punch, strike anyone. He was having a verbal conversation with someone about them being parked illegally, and then he's violently attacked. Now, in response to that attack, he used lethal force to defend himself. And of course, we'll address that at trial. But the idea that this is all about handicap parking, it's not. It's about the proper use of lethal force when someone comes out of a store and just violently blindsides someone, really for no reason. We're mystified as to why Mr. McLaughlin resorted to such physical violence when he had no idea what was even going on.
I know that, and you probably know, you're making a lot of people angry right now too by saying that. I mean, there's two sides, right? There's two sides.
I'm sure.
To every single case.
This case is unique in that about half the community thinks that Mr. Drejka acted within his rights. The other half think that he responded with excessive force. The law clearly permits Mr. Drejka to do what he did. And I think when the jury hears the actual legal instructions from the court, they will see that his actions comported squarely within the bookends of the stand your ground defense and self-defense. As Sheriff Gualtieri himself said repeatedly in multiple news conferences.
Well, that was going to be, I wanted to point this out, and if you're just again joining this Facebook Live, we're talking about the Michael Drejka case. It's a stand your ground case. It's taken center stage in the country. It brings up stand your ground as well as racial tensions. Sheriff Bob Gualtieri in Pinellas County initially decided not to charge Michael Drejka in this case. There was quite an uproar about that. And I also want to point out, jury selection begins tomorrow, 1 year and 1 month to the day that Marquise McLaughlin died. He is a father of 3. So let's talk about that, John. Sheriff Bob Gualtieri initially did not want to pursue this case.
Well, I think not only initially, I don't think he ever wanted to pursue the case. It was the state attorney's office that filed the charge in this case. They didn't take it to a grand jury and see what a grand jury made up of citizens from Pinellas County would have said. No, indeed, instead of taking it to the grand jury, they just direct filed a very serious criminal charge of manslaughter against my client. And again, I just don't think it's legally justified. I don't think Sheriff Gualtieri believes it's legally justified. And I think in the end that the truth will come out.
Well, let me ask you this, and I know we have been discussing the handicapped parking space. I think a lot of people, I mean, I know you also have a handicap placard, correct?
Yes, I do.
I mean, not to get too personal, but you have a handicap placard that you use. I think a lot of people don't also realize that you and your team have taken this case on pro bono. And so you're not getting paid.
No.
1 cent.
Not 1 cent.
The time that this case involves, I can't even imagine. Why did you and your team decide to take this case on in the first place? The publicity?
No. Honestly, it was a case where we felt that someone was being unfairly targeted by the government. I think the state has an agenda, the state prosecutors in this case, to change the stand your ground law. And I think they, by obtaining a conviction, even though the facts don't warrant it, in their minds, they see that as a way to get some changes to the stand your ground statute. It was the will of the people of Florida that put that law into place. It's not the business of the state attorney to try to turn around and change it by wrongfully prosecuting an innocent man. And I think that's exactly what's going on here. This case is not about race. It's not about handicap parking. It is about the right of a person to use deadly force when they're violently attacked. And if you look at the disparities between the size of Mr. McLaughlin and Mr. Drejka, Mr. McLaughlin was a very athletic, strong, tall, heavy-set man, very strong man, much younger than Mr. Drejka. Mr. Drejka has his own physical issues, his own disability, and he's not someone who could fight someone like that. So he was put in a position where he wasn't even given an opportunity, Mr. Drejka, to retreat. He was thrown to the ground. He was in a very vulnerable position on the ground. He had no choice but to use deadly force to end that confrontation. Now, I know the state's going to try to argue that, oh, Mr. McLaughlin was retreating, and they're going to show a slowed down version of the video in an attempt to try to establish that. It's nonsense. All of our experts that looked at that video said that Mr. McLaughlin was not retreating. Even Sheriff Gualtieri said he was not retreating, he was blading. He was hiking up his shorts, he was getting in a position where he was going to fight. Even his own girlfriend said that at the time when interviewed by detectives, that he was taking a fighting stance against Mr. Drejka. So this whole idea of the retreat and he was turning away, this is just microanalyzing by the state later trying to justify a wrongful prosecution. There's no evidence to support that at all.
Well, all of that, of course, will come out in trial.
Well, all of it won't, because our experts have been prohibited from testifying as to their opinion that Mr. McLaughlin was blading, that he was the aggressor, that he was continuing his attack, that Mr. Drejka had no choice but to use lethal force. The judges prohibited all of that from coming in for whatever reason, and now it will be up to the jury to look at the video collectively on their own and make a determination. We're upset that a slowed down version of the video is being put into evidence in this case. The judge permitted it. We strongly objected to that. We still strongly object because a slowed down version is not representative of reality. Mr. Drejka doesn't view things in 2/3 speed or half speed. He views things in real time like all human beings do. Our medical expert, psychology expert, we had experts ready to testify that Mr. Drejka would not have been in a position to analyze slight movements by Mr. McLaughlin. And again, there are other experts who said those movements are actually indicative of an ongoing attack, not a retreat, not turning away as the state's alleging. So they're trying to use the slowed down video to make their case, and in reality, the real-time video shows that Mr. Drejka had no choice but to fire.
John, you also, though, keep on talking about that this case is not about race. And with all due respect, I've been a journalist for more than 20 years. And taking a look at this case objectively, to me, it does seem that race does play a huge factor.
How? Where, again, the court has already ruled there's no evidence that there was any racial motivation by Mr. Drejka. The only way it could play a factor is if you believe that Mr. Drejka only fired upon Mr. McLaughlin because he was an African American. That's absurd. There's absolutely no suggestion of that anywhere in the evidence.
Well, let me ask you this in our candid conversation. Will race come up during the trial?
Well, it will come up during jury selection because there's been so much misinformation by the media on this case that we have no choice but now to address the race issue, but explain to the jury that the court has ruled that this is not a race issue in this case. And to those jurors that have been unfortunately tainted, if you will, by this whole race argument, and of course that has a lot to do with the victims' families' lawyers perpetuating this theme. Benjamin Crump and Michelle Rayner Goolsby and Kelly McCabe that have went out there and spread this misinformation throughout the community that this case is about race. It has nothing to do with race. The judge himself has said it. And clearly, this is a judge who's a former prosecutor, is very stern in this case. He's not going to make a pronouncement like that if he didn't believe it. So this is a situation where race is really not an issue, but it's become an issue because of all the misinformation.
And I want to point out that I did try to talk to prosecutors, but it is standard procedure where a prosecution team cannot talk about a case until after the trial is over. And sometimes, even then, they won't talk to you about the case. As far as the defense team, I know I had mentioned earlier that I had reached out to them as well. I did reach out several months ago, but in all fairness, the trial starts tomorrow, so I have not had a chance to talk to them, and I, of course, will try after this interview to at least try to get some type of comment. John, let's bring up something else, and I know this is a very touchy subject. I know from interviewing you in the past for many, many years, you are very open and very honest, and you've always been one of those attorneys you can call, you will go on camera, but you yourself have been mired in some personal drama. Do you feel that this drama is taking center stage?
No.
This case?
Again, it's just a distraction by the state and the media to take away the focus from the facts in the case. My personal life has no bearing in this case whatsoever. I mean, how could it? It's absurd. And it's just an attempt to try to malign those people who are defending Mr. Drejka by portraying us in a bad light. The reality is It has nothing to do with the defense of Mr. Drejka. And really, what's been reported is inaccurate anyways. It keeps being reported that I was arrested for domestic violence. What's not being reported is that the state dropped the charge in less than a month because my ex-wife had lied about what had happened and later admitted that she lied, later gave back the very rug that she stole that caused the dispute between me and my ex-wife. So, I mean, the reality in which you're reading are completely different. I read these articles and I sit there mystified thinking, wow, you know, they're saying these things and they're not reporting the truth, the end result, which was the case was dropped. It was a wrongful arrest. Everyone knows that. I said it when I left the jail to the media that was gathered outside the jail. I said, I guarantee you this case will be dropped and that she lied. And exactly what I said happened. And no one has reported that at all. No one. They only report the arrest.
And I know that the charges were dropped pretty quickly after that happened. I mean, I can't even imagine the emotional toll, but your ex-wife is also now facing some very serious charges. She is in jail, facing trial. She could face up to how many years?
Life.
She could face up to life. I've met her numerous times, actually, because she worked in your office. I have to say, just knowing her and meeting her, it is surprising. And I think it has come out, you could talk about this, that it was drugs.
Well, I think how surprising it is to me, but it does show, and I don't want to go into a lot of detail and make this about my personal life, but I will just say that obviously drugs can cause a lot of damage in a person's life. Look what it did in my life. You know, we'll have to see what happens. But yes, she is incarcerated for crimes against me. But again, that's not relevant to our defense in this case. What the focus is why did Mr. Drejka have to use deadly force to protect himself? That's going to be explained to the jury during the course of this trial. That's the focus, not about the defense lawyer's personal relationships, whether a defense lawyer was subject to an arrest or something. They even went through the arrest record of some of our co-counsel. I think it's just ridiculous, really ridiculous.
And not to keep on delving into the personal life bit, because you're right. I mean, I do feel that there is a lot of focus on that, right? But also, you know, there's been a connection that the main anchor at the CBS station here in Tampa, Florida, Reginald Roundtree, actually lost his job because of an exclusive interview that he did with Michael Drejka. I know the two of you have a 25-year relationship. Oftentimes, journalists, for people who are joining in, we do have sources, we build relationships, and because of those relationships, we're able to do interviews based on our credibility and our reputation. Reginald has come out and has said that he feels that he has lost his job over this.
I don't think he really said that. I think what he said and his lawyer said is that he felt he lost his job over age discrimination. That's what he had already initiated well before my involvement, before the Drejka case even occurred.
With the EEOC.
Yes.
I believe.
So he was already informed that his contract was not going to be renewed under the same terms, and was told before the case even happened. So the idea that my representation of Mr. Drejka or anything that I've done had any impact on his employment is ridiculous. His own lawyer and he himself will tell you it had nothing to do with it.
John, and I know we touched upon this a few minutes ago, but so much of this case does have your personal life involved. So what would you say to people?
It's irrelevant. I mean, who's looking at the personal lives of the prosecutors? There's a lot, I'm sure, that they could dig up on them if they wanted to, but nobody's going that direction. I wonder why. Because again, it's an attempt to facilitate the agenda of those who want to see the law change. And this is not the way you go about it. You don't prosecute innocent individuals. You don't malign defense attorneys to gain a change in a statute. You go to your legislature. The reason why they're not doing that is the legislature rejected any change to the statute. So they were kind of stuck. And now they're trying to use this case as an impetus to change the law. It's wrong. I'll stand by it as being wrong till whatever happens. It's just ridiculous to me that the state has went to these lengths when all they should have done is gone to the people and see what the people want. And the majority of people support the Stand Your Ground statute in its current form. They don't want it changed. That's clear.
Have you talked to Michael Drejka about, or has he talked to you about how so much, a lot of the case is also focusing though on your personal life, and does it concern him?
Not at all. He knows, he understands what's going on. He sees it. I mean, you'd have to be a blind man not to see what's happening in this case. Again, none of that is relevant to the defense of the case. I've had many successes on many difficult cases in the past. This is not my first trial, and it's certainly not my first high-profile trial, and it's not the first trial I've started where everyone said, you're going to lose, he's obviously guilty, and those kinds of absurd comments. No one knows the real facts because no one's heard the evidence yet. So when the real facts come out, make your judgment then, not now, and you will see that Mr. Drejka didn't commit any crime. As the sheriff himself said, after a complete investigation in the case, he said that Mr. Drejka acted squarely within the bookends of the Stand Your Ground statute. I couldn't agree more.
Will Michael Drejka take the stand in his defense?
We will see. That's not something we're going to reveal at this point.
Is there anything else that you can talk about the case that you are willing to reveal at this point?
Not at this point. I mean, we've talked about jury selection. I mean, obviously, jury selection is extremely crucial in a case like this. We need a fair-minded jury that's representative of the real community, that's not an isolated pocket who has an agenda. We want people who are real people, who have real ideas, and understand the real issues. So that's what we'll be seeking in jury selection.
How long do you think that jury selection will take? About 3 days?
It's completely unknown. Given the unprecedented publicity in this case, it could be a few days, it could be a week. We just don't know.
Once the jury is in place, and once again, that's 6 people. I've heard that it's 4 alternates. You're saying it could be 2 alternates. We're not exactly sure what the judge is going to decide at this point. Once the trial actually gets started, how long do you think it will last? 1 to 2 weeks?
The state indicated that their case in chief will only take 3 days to present. I think the defense case will take a day, maybe 2. So the actual trial itself shouldn't last longer than a week. It's the jury selection that's the unknown.
And talk about, too, the national press that will be there. You said Court TV right now is covering this
Court
case.
TV, CBS News, National. We've gotten inquiries from dozens of others. It will probably be one of the most covered cases since the Casey Anthony trial and O.J. Simpson before that.
I've also talked to a couple of national outlets that have reached out to me because of stories that I've done, actually exclusive interviews that I've done with you. I would like the opportunity myself to speak to Michael Drejka. Do you think you might be able to make that happen, at least after the trial, maybe?
Well, certainly after the trial, but whether during the trial, we'll see. I mean, at this point, Mr. Drejka wants to concentrate on his innocence, and that message gets through loud and clear, and he's just worried, given the slant of a lot of the media in the case to date, has been very negative towards him. And it's really odd because I've never experienced this. I've been practicing law now for over 33 years. And I've done dozens and dozens of criminal trials, many of them very high profile. And I've never run into this this attitude that, this agenda. This is very troubling to us, all of us on the defense team. We want the truth to come out. We want people to see the evidence as it truly is and make the call based on that, not on a news article that has all the facts wrong. And that's what we've been seeing repeatedly is, like I said, going back to the whole thing with it's about a handicapped parking space. Mr. McLaughlin didn't know what the argument was about. He just came out and violently shoved a man. So why don't we say it's about someone violently attacking an innocent person instead of about a handicapped parking space?
Well, I can tell you, as you know, it is one of those cases that there's a lot of debate about what happened. We'll see more in trial. And I want to point out, too, that if Marquise McLaughlin's family or the attorneys want to speak with me, I would be happy to do that, given the equal amount of airtime. But I certainly appreciate you, John, for being so candid and open and also talking about, some of the personal issues that you've been facing.
Sure.
Before we wrap up this Facebook Live, is there anything that you would like to add?
No. I just ask people to keep an open mind, look at the evidence and stay away from media reports that are inaccurate.
Okay, thank you so much. And I wanted to share that this Facebook Live will be shared, so you can find it on Facebook, but I also have a website, serenafazan.com. It will be uploaded to YouTube, so you can also watch the interview on YouTube, and of course I'll keep close tabs with you on the case, and we'll follow it very closely. I'm sure the nation will be following it too.
Most definitely.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.